Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. Dr. Mike Brass joins us today. He is the CISO for UbiSense. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'd love to start out as we usually do. I want to hear about your journey from why you first decided to get involved in this wonderful field of technology and cyber, and where you're at today.
Um, it's a bit of a long story just on that. My background's actually in archaeology, history, anthropology, etc. And so I'm South African, and I've been here in the UK now for some 24 and a half years, but born and bred South African in Cape Town. I knew towards the end of my time in Cape Town that I was going to move across here to the UK, but I was finishing off my archaeology undergraduate or first year of postgraduate studies, as it's called in South Africa. Um, and I was wondering, well, what do I need to do to actually earn some money? And the other field that I happened to be aware of was IT because of my father having worked for IBM at the time. So I trained up in that last year. So I was running parallel with my final year of university, got my A plus, did some courses in Windows NT, etc. Moved across here, and I just remember it very clearly because I landed when it was snowing on Christmas Day in 1999. So it's always stuck in my memory. And under 2 months later, I got my first job, and I actually managed to skip the help desk. I went
Mm.
straight into second line at Oxford University Press as an IT support officer, doing various installations, account setups, and that. But there's a differential between that and the help desk there, and that progressed through various charity and financial organizations within the UK. And I did take a year out in between to do my master's at University College London from 2003 to 2004. I met my wife, and we moved across. She's from Malta. But we moved across to Cambridge, and I was employed there as a senior systems administrator for 4 years, from 2004 to 2008. They then outsourced the IT function, I was made redundant from there. And 1 month later, I got job as the 13th staff member of the Institute for Government, which is an apolitical think tank in the UK that has dealings with the entire civil service and all the way up into 10 Downing Street. And I was to
Mm.
set up their IT operations. I was the IT manager there. And I spent from 2009 to 2017 to April 2017 overseeing the entire security and IT functions, and a couple of other things within the organization, and having set all of that up from scratch. Then in 2017, I went across to a company called Dialite, which is a manufacturing global company throughout North America, Europe, Australasia, so Australia and New Zealand, as well as other parts of the Far East. They've got a factory out in Malaysia, for example, and a couple of factories present at the moment in Mexico. And I remember while I was there, so I was doing cybersecurity functions and I was overseeing the IT for the entire EMEA, UK, and Australasia regions. And there'd been an external report commissioned from EY on the cybersecurity. And I took that report after a period of time, and the then CFO, who later became the CEO, were in the same office together. And I remember one day I just picked up the report and I walked into the CFO's office and said, "Nothing's been done about this,
Mm.
and obviously I'm doing X, Y, and Z and everything else." And 2 minutes later, I walked out being in charge of the global security function as well at Dialite. That's always a story. It's a true story, obviously, but it's one that I love to tell because
No,
it.
I love that. You saw a need, and so many times people will like point out problems, but they don't point out solutions. And you took a problem and pointed out a solution, and you were the solution.
Ultimately, yes, in all that. It's because I was looking well beyond the technical functions, obviously, of cybersecurity, with my background within archaeology, I'm very used to project management, and there's a whole bunch of other stakeholder managements and other capabilities that you bring to bear from the outside world. And what I was really interested in and focused on, because obviously at the Institute for Government, um, I was talking very regularly with the CEO. CFO was my boss, etc. on there. And I wanted to raise the profile of security within Dialight, and I wanted to have that governance properly established within. Um, then, just a couple of years later, in the second half of 2019, I actually got headhunted by UBSense,
Hmm.
and I joined them at the end of November 2019. And the entire rationale behind that was because the information security function needed to be built up within UBSense. They also needed someone to oversee the IT's global function as well. So in effect, I'm the CISO and CIO all rolled into one, and the data privacy officer as well. So I've got an entire background, and I'm overseeing three various functions on there. And I love the data privacy aspect. A and why I've got that role in particular wasn't just because at Dialight I helped, along with one person in legal, Dialight ensure global compliance with GDPR. It's also because I believe there is a strong convergence that is happening between CISO roles and, particularly in Europe, the data privacy regulations and directives, as well as the myriad of, I think at last count, there's 104 EU directives, regulations at the moment that mention cybersecurity and data privacy in some form or another.
Hmm.
And all of that is converging. It doesn't mean the CISO is taking over the DPO legal role, particularly in larger organizations. You're not taking the place of the lawyer, but you're having to understand what the implications of all of these directives and regulations are, particularly if you're having to comply with NIS2, DORA. Um, and let's say you're certified on ISO 27001 and you want to encompass all the activities of your organization. Well, you've got to know those directives and regulations and what is applicable and what isn't. Um, so while I was doing that, I've also got my PhD, which is in archaeology at the same time. So I got that in, my Viva was in March 2016, and I'm the director for a University College London Sudanese joint mission that is out in Sudan at the moment, which is unfortunately in the middle of a civil war.
Hmm.
But my point of mentioning that again, there's cross pollination between stakeholder management. You're dealing with politics, you're dealing with team management. There are so many cross pollination of skills that you need to bring to bear, um, to do with the governance, strategy, project management, almost anything, you name it, apart from getting down into the technical weeds like penetration testing and anything else. But when you take it that one step up, that cross pollination is extremely, extremely important. And obviously, that does include risk management as well.
I think I was going to ask how, if anything, from your archaeology academic background translated into cybersecurity, but you brought it well. You answered about the project management and the stakeholders, and I think that you bring out a good point there for just in general for everyone, where it's like there's so many other skills besides the technical that as you go further into the information security realm, that it is important to have that holistic understanding, because otherwise, if you don't, if you're so focused on, like you said, the penetration tests, understanding the nuances and the requirements of other regulations that aren't directly cybersecurity related, like the GDPR. Um, I mean, I know that there are elements within GDPR that are cyber related, but that's an important point. Is there anything else from the archaeology side that you've brought to cyber?
For people wanting to explore that in a bit more detail, so at this point, I'll mention that I've created a GRC data privacy course on Udemy. It's over 10 hours, it's 10 and a quarter hours long. It's designed for everybody from apprentices to people who are elsewhere within information securities, or rather cyber security front, and wanting to know what the GRC part of the information security actually is. What are the implications of the data privacy? In module 2, it's either the first or the second lecture there. This is exactly what I go into in quite a bit more detail, um, talking about that particular journey of my background of bringing that cross pollination of skills out. So, just to elaborate a bit on that, let's say, unfortunately, it's not going to happen, but let's say I've got a field season happening next January. What is the lead up to all of that? The lead up is you're applying for funding. So, you're writing up a report, you're actually doing the funding application, you're making a business case, in effect, as to why your field season should be funded. You've got to make sure that the networking around that funding application is in place. Let's say it's approved. You've then, from the university perspective, you're doing risk assessments, going through, you're pulling together the people that are needed for the field team. So you're pulling together what the actual, never mind the people involved on the project. What are your aims? What's the scope of that particular field season? And bringing in that expertise and bringing in the field workers that would be needed. You're also talking with people from other organizations at exactly the same time. So in my case, I'm talking with people from the Antiquities Service within Sudan, right up to the director level there. So again, if your company is partnering with other companies in whatever shape or form, you're going to have that forms of communication. Internally within my university, I'll be talking up to the director level, because the director of my university for the Institute of Archaeology is one of the project team members. So you're managing all of that. Then you've got the execution phase when you're actually out there, you land, you're out there in the field, you're managing the team, you're managing each steps that have to be done within the field on a day-to-day. You are analyzing, or maybe assisting in analyzing a lot of the results that are coming out. You're coordinating all the activities. So somebody could be doing botanical analysis, somebody could be doing looking at stone tools. Again, you could have 3 trenches open on the go, and you're coordinating and you're managing all of that. Then you're having to bring this information together. What is the relevance to the actual project, etc., and compile it? You also be reporting back to the various institutions. Again, it's all of these particular business skills coming into play. And I'm fully aware that a lot of people now make the distinction between information security and cyber security, where I regard cyber as technical and the information security as an overarching
Right.
umbrella. I know others don't make that distinction and pull it all together. But for convenience sake, when anyone hears me using the different terms, that's exactly what I'm referring to on there. It doesn't mean that you have to be coming up through the technical route. There are some advantages to it, but you can also be coming in from other avenues, bringing your skills to bear, and then picking up the information that you need to know in order to do your job effectively for a particular organization.
I'm glad that you mentioned that little side thing about information security and cybersecurity. I'm in complete alignment with you on it, but sometimes it's like I even slip a little bit and use one in term of the other. I wish that as an industry we would all settle upon that nomenclature, but I think it's important. So long, I mean, you can use whatever words you want, just so long as the person or persons that you're communicating with understand where you're coming from. So I always tell people to do exactly what you just did. It's a good idea to take a moment to point out this is how I use those words. You probably saw a gap. That was I know small and mid-sized businesses have issues with regards to um, just their overall governance, risk, and compliance initiatives and endeavors. But before delving into the SMB side, or in the case of over there, SME, um, I'm curious about your why. So you spent all this time creating this course for Udemy. I mean, that must have taken an awful lot of work. What is your why behind that?
The genesis lies. in that I'm also an assessor for BCS, which it's formerly called the British Computer Society. Now it's just called BCS, the Chartered Institute of IT. So it's got Royal Charter status from the Queen over here. The UK government has various apprenticeship pathways. So you've got um, under our sort of umbrella, you've got the cybersecurity pathways, you've got ICT pathways, you've got data protection and various other pathways going on. So I'm an assessor on cybersecurity and parts of the ICT. I'm an external assessor. I don't have any dealings whatsoever with the internal mechanisms of BCS. I just need to make that point clear to everybody. What I found, and I'm quite open about this, it is no secret. I found for the cybersecurity pathways, on any of the pathways that were mentioned in our ISMS, an information security management system, the knowledge of the apprentice was highly variable and still is highly variable. And I found that the training providers were not providing any adequate training with regards to this. And so sometimes I would need to refer, uh, in blanket terms, almost fail an apprentice. So they would have to go away, rework the project, rework their knowledge, and then they would be allowed to reset that particular assessment again, whether it's with myself or another assessor. And after a few times of this happening and seeing that variability between somebody who's excellent and obviously had that internal support and others who are working in much more siloed organizations, and then the impact upon if I have referred them back and they've had to do internal research and then come back to me and I've assessed them again, all of this was it was stark. And I said, there's a gap here for somebody with my skill set and my knowledge to attempt to rectify. And so I started writing up the various modules and lessons within those modules. And the more I got into it, the more I thought, actually, I can expand this a bit. Actually, somebody from a sales department would be interested. In fact, somebody on LinkedIn had messaged me to say a person from their sales department had got in contact to ask if they could be notified when my course is actually available because they wanted to brush up on the business side of the GLC. Not to transfer into it, but to see the value and to incorporate it within their particular skill sets. Then I thought, well, I'm getting into this in so much detail, I might as well go a little bit further. So I covered the entire ISACA CRIS curriculum within it. And in order to do that, I was referring back onto the governance side. And then I thought, well, if I'm going down all of that route, and given what I was attempting to do, well, I need to obviously explain NIST. I need to explain ISO 27001. I need to explain some more of the standards that are actually out there. And so I did that. And I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. And I threw in the data privacy to reinforce my view that CISOs and any GLC person needs to be taking this a lot more seriously rather than the CIA triad. The data privacy regulations and directives, whether it's from Colorado, whether it's California, whether it's Singapore, whether it's South African or Australian or anything coming out of the EU, it's a lot more serious these days than just the good old CIA triad. And so you have to familiarize yourself with it. There's a bit more I can always say on that, but that's the 3-minute nutshell on it.
Well, no, I love it because again, it's another example of seeing a problem, seeing a gap, and actually doing something about it. So I commend you for doing that. Do you see this as a gap with small and mid-sized businesses or enterprises, or do you see there being another, like from your perspective, what's the most significant threat to SMBs or SMEs today?
I think there is a gap in terms of this. Within my own company, I mean, what I've gone and done is I've got various champions throughout the different arms of the business, and there's that full communication through spreading that responsibility. So I'm not talking about the accountability, which obviously resides with the CFO and the CEO. I'm talking about that responsibility and divesting that through, but obviously coordinated through the center, which is through myself and my team on all of that. Some companies are fortunate enough to also be operating quite similar, or with their own mechanisms, but the end result is exactly the same in terms of making sure that the company is secure as possible. And security in that way is just protecting the value creation processes of the actual organization and making sure there is full alignment with the strategy, the objectives, and the implementation thereof of those objectives. Um, and part of that then obviously comes back into the threat landscape, what is applicable from that threat landscape. So, for example, we deal very heavily with the German automobile industry, and I love picking on them because they are such an easy example. There are two reports that come out per year with the automobile industry. There's one for worldwide, and there's one that's produced by the German automobile industry itself. Unfortunately, they are so generic. It could be produced by almost any private company. It could be part of the other 101 such reports that are produced. I, I've read them. I don't find much particular value. So the approach that I always try and encourage when you're a critical tier one part of a supply chain, or it could be a tier two. It doesn't matter if you're a critical component or if you've got critical components, do this further down your supply chain. Is I spoke with the threat people within one of these particular companies, and they responded quite affirmatively, which was very encouraging to see, specifying a few groups that they were keeping an eye on. And they mentioned one group in particular, which is the Russian group Quilin. It's behind the NHS attack, or rather an attack on a very critical supplier into NHS London hospitals. And that particular group, which just does it for financial gain, actually attacked a supplier for automotive parts back at the end of 2023. So their advice immediately was, from their perspective, passing that on to ourselves, keep an eye on that particular threat actor group and and make your own determinations internally as to what is actually applicable. Um, and then the rest that the automotive industry is seen is obviously the usual phishing, business email compromise, ransomware, just like the rest of the world.
Right.
But you start to get a feel of what particular groups are targeting what. And therefore, I encourage people to engage, whether it's down your supply chain or whether it's further up. If you're part of other supply chains, engage those particular organizations to see what particular groups are um, actually targeting them and what do you need to be aware of. I don't think there is enough done of that. And the reason for me saying that is because I know in the USA and particularly out here in Europe is you've got their interactions between certain arms of government. So for example, here in the UK, the NCSC, they have got their communication groups set up with banks, with financial companies, with other national critical infrastructure companies. But the level below that, the moment you get below that, you get into that particular supply chain, you're finding that top tier is actually clamming up. Probably not so much the banks, because
Hmm.
they're very used to this sort of thing. But below that, the information is not being properly streamed down. And so I always encourage anyone that I'm speaking with, if you're a part of this, whether you're in such a critical infrastructure company or you're a critical part of that supply chain, try and take some measures to ensure that information starts flowing down to you. Otherwise, you're sitting there with 101 threat reports and you're attempting to decipher what is applicable. Now, there are some GRC platforms. I don't particularly feel like promoting any of them on the show, but there are some GRC platforms which go beyond looking at, okay, I'll pick on CrowdStrike. They've got a number of endpoints around the world. They're pulling in this particular information, find you can get a certain coverage out of them. But there's some GRC platforms which will go away and actually look at insurers' databases, also pull data from endpoints from multiple sources, and then break it down into the industry verticals and compare and contrast it to the controls that are actually in place at your particular organization, and start to come up with other risk matrix and risk scores, and advice, in terms of where you start needing to look to improve the security posture of your organization. So this is where GRC is so much of value. It's not that technical implementation, it's looking at this holistic picture, and then bringing the specialists in to make sure that all of that is done. So I'm not casting shade on world-class security engineers. Critical, absolutely vital, but the two need to go hand in hand, and they are separate skill sets.
Seems very stressful, though, thinking about all of the information that you're trying to sift through, and anytime that you can get some measure to prioritize, categorize, and because ultimately all that we want to get to is dealing with the top threats and working our way down, the top risks and working our way down. That's all we can do, but it can be stressful, and information security as a broad field can be very stressful. And I always encourage folks that you need to take care of yourself before you can take care of your organization's security program, and that you need to get away. And you need to, I always like to use the word decompress. Different people use different words. But what's one of the things you do, Mike, to get away from all the stresses of information security?
I'm an avid cyclist. So
Ah,
back in my youth, I was in the top 3% of in terms of fitness in sports active people within South
wow.
Africa. The doctor, unknowingly, he was doing a blood test on me for something else, and he slipped in, can the lab also test for X, Y, and Z? And the results came back, and he was telling me. So no, absolutely cycling, family, obviously family time, and I love spending time just out in my garden, and being South African when the sun is shining, doing a nice big braai, which it, wood charcoal, in other words, that sort of barbecue. I don't like using gas. I like using the old charcoal and wood, and putting it all together, having some friends, family around, etc. That's what I like to do.
Do you do any indoor cycling, like Zwift or anything like that, or is it all
No,
outdoor? Okay, I've
no.
gotten into
Going
indoor.
around, going around the track. I'm always afraid that I would go bloop. It's just I would get around
No, no,
properly.
no.
No, no.
I mean indoor as far as like with trainers and programs. Like it's almost like a game. It's something called Zwift, where you basically cycle with other folks on a static trainer around the world. I've been doing that. I got into it in the beginning of COVID. I'm not nearly as I cycle in order to stay healthy, but not I'm not any. Anyway, I digress. I could go down a whole nother path talking about that. But I do want to ask you about what your future plans are coming up. It could be anything related to the course, or I understand that you are possibly working on a book.
Yep. So on the back of the course being released, I got a message from CRC Press inviting me to put forward a book proposal. Did that. That was accepted. CRC Press. They've published the other books like the CISO Compass, Data Privacy Compass, and quite a few other books on there, including one that's actually in front of me at the moment, the Security Leaders Communication Playbook, by old Jeffrey Brown, which I think very highly of. The book, I don't know the author. But anyway, that proposal was accepted. So submission needs to be complete by the middle of next year on that. Apart from that, an executive MBA course.
That's awesome. Well, looking forward to seeing the book. Would love to bring you back on when that comes to fruition. I'm actually going to be talking. I usually don't do repeats here. I've never done a repeat on the Virtual CISO Moment, but I am bringing back an author who released their first book, Anthony Scarola. He released it back in March, I believe, and he's going to come on and talk about it later on this month. Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I'm glad that we were able to get this rescheduled, and it all worked out well, despite the sun shining in my face.
No, thank you very much for having me. Been an honor.
And everybody, stay secure.